Welcome to Finding Certainty with your host and U.S. Army veteran, Patrick Lang. Over the next hour, you'll learn from Patrick and his expert guests how to attract more certainty into your business and your life. Now, here is your host, Patrick Lang.
Welcome to Finding Certainty, everyone. Very pleased today to have a good friend of mine as our guest, and also a consummate expert in her field of expertise. We're going to get into this, but Simone Kvalheim, thank you for being here today. Really excited to speak with you and have you share with our listeners your extraordinary story.
Well, thank you, Patrick. You know, I've been listening to you since you started Finding Certainty, so I'm so excited to be a guest. So thank you for having me.
It's our supreme privilege and honor. Over the last several months, I've gotten to be good friends with you and your husband, Rick. It seems like we follow each other around. Every event I show up, you're there, and every event you show up, I'm there. And we just we're kind of like the Three Musketeers, aren't we? I can always count on the Kvalheims being there and supporting and just cheering on the causes that we're involved in. And it's just such a privilege and such a pleasure to see you too. So, you're so active and involved here in the community here in Las Vegas. And it's just been really a pleasure for me. So
thank you.
I hope you feel the same.
Absolutely, Patrick. I met you before we actually moved to Vegas, and we've only lived here now for 6 months. And if you had asked me a year ago, would I live in Vegas? I'd have said, no way, coming from California. Because all I knew was the Strip.
Right.
There is so much more to Vegas. And on top of that, besides the fact that gas is a lot cheaper and things are a lot cheaper, the people here are amazing. So don't judge Vegas by the Strip.
I completely agree. And it's funny because you totally echo my own sentiment. We relocated here from San Diego in March. And I say it's because it put us right in the middle between my family in Utah, her brother in Phoenix, and we like San Diego. So this puts us kind of right in the epicenter. But I was reticent. I was hesitant to move to Vegas because I'm not a huge fan of the desert. And, Vegas has this image, I guess, of Sin City, and that's not us. We're very conservative and we don't drink, we don't gamble, but we love Vegas, right? So go figure. Why is that? Well, it's lots of reasons, and you hit a couple of them. The people here are wonderful, right? I mean, it is yourselves included, of course, but we found a great church, a congregation we attend. We love the ward we're in. We love the neighbors. We really like being 20 minutes from the Strip where we can go see a show or go catch a restaurant or something. But when you're out in the neighborhoods, you almost forget that it's even there. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. The only time we go to the Strip is when there's an event or friends come and we want to go. And like you, we don't drink or gamble. So there's no other need to be down there.
Right. So
being out here close to the hills, and a lot of people don't know that there are mountains around Vegas. They think everything is flat and desert. It's not. It's actually very beautiful out here. I
love looking at the mountains, and my wife actually loves the cityscape. When you look down on the lights from up here on the hillside, it's really beautiful. And you make a good point. We either are going into town for a conference or a workshop or something, seminar, or usually taking friends. But I like the fact that almost every time, it's easily 90% of the time, someone says, I've got to go to a conference. And I say, where is it? It's in Vegas, right? So they're all coming here, and we don't have to go. We don't have to fly there to see them, travel, pay for a hotel. I mean, we were just in a big workshop this last week, as you know, and everybody else had to fly in. I just drove down from my house. I went home every night, So that's kind of a nice feature of being here in Las Vegas as well, as I'm sure you would agree. So
there's a lot of certainty around just that.
Well, it's definitely less expensive on the budget, so I like that. And it's great. It's a great airport. You can get anywhere. The flights, many of them are subsidized, so there's a lot of things. We're really coming to to fall in love with it, to be honest. I could see us staying here long term, even though I'm still not a huge fan of the desert. I mean, I've lived in these gorgeous places like San Diego and Portland, Oregon, and Alaska, and I love the trees, I love the green, and I love the mountains, but this is a pretty good place for a central hub. You know, we can travel and see those places. I can go fishing, I can go hop on a plane, I can do these other things, but it's you know, despite, in addition to the fact there's no state income tax here, which was another draw for us, right? So anyway, we could talk all day about Vegas, but let's not do that. We have far more important things to discuss. So we mentioned that we were at a conference this last week. I'll put a plug for Bill and his Rainmaker Summit. That's actually how Simone and I first met. She's a good friend of a mutual friend, Frank Hellring. And Frank said, you've got to go meet this Simone Kvalheim. She's in Vegas. And we started texting back and forth. And then she invited me to come to this lunch with a billionaire friend of ours named Bill Walsh. Well, long story short, we both became a part of what he would call his Rainmaker. I call it the Rainmaker groupies, but I don't know what you call that. But
well, we learned to make it rain.
But he's the self-proclaimed American small business expert or small business coach, and it's not just hyperbole. I have learned so much from him. He's opened up so many doors. We're now partnered in 2 different projects, launching a third. And I owe all that to you, Simone. As soon as it starts generating revenue, you're going to make some nice overrides. So, you know, we're excited about it.
Thank you. You know, it's one of the things that really pleases my heart is when I invite somebody to something and they say yes, and they come and they decide for themselves. You know, because there's so much noise out there in the business world, the health world, our family world. A lot of people say yes, and then they don't show up. And we know 80% of our success in whatever we do is about showing up for our health, showing up for our success, and showing up for our life. And so you're one of those people I know who always says yes and figures it out. Yeah.
Well, I certainly try to be. You know, I agree with you. You know, half the battle is actually showing up and making the effort. And it's not always easy. You know, this last week during Rainmaker, it was 5 days between Rainmaker and Ultimate Wealth Camp. And the last day is the Icon speaker training, as you know. And, you know, I got there late a few days. I had to leave early a couple of days because I'm also managing, you know, my wife, church responsibilities. I had a client who came to town, you know, so I probably saw about 80% of it. It was a repeat for me since I attended in Orlando back in October, but even though I'd been there once before and it was a repeat for me, I still gained so much from what he taught. And anyone who doesn't know Bill Walsh, he really can help take your business to the next level. I highly recommend you check him out. Look up either Power Team International or Rainmaker. Bill Walsh, he's all over the internet. So thank you, Simone. I really appreciate the introduction. And, you know, I look forward to learning lots more and doing lots more with him. So let's talk a little bit about you and put you on the hot spot or the hot seat. I always start the show by explaining 2 of the reasons why I've invited this guest. And really, when it comes to Simone and Rick as well, because they're a power couple. The first reason I wanted to invite you was what you are doing to help bless seniors, to help reverse Alzheimer's. And I know that's a big statement, right? Not just to prevent or help or serve, but reverse Alzheimer's. That has got to be addressed. That message has got to get out there. So, I know you've spoken on several different stages about that. If you look at her bio, it's like a who's who of the world's greatest influencers, and there's Simone right in the middle of them all. But so that's the first reason. We got to get this message out. It's very important. It is life-changing. And so, and secondly, you took the words out of my mouth when you talk about showing up, because that's what you and Rick do as well. You are always showing up, not just for your own projects, but showing up and supporting others, showing up and cheering them on, showing up and networking and serving. And it was from the very first time I met you, Simone, that is what has impressed me in and about everything else. But that's really made an impact on me. I try to do the same, but I think you do it in spades better than even I do. So
Thank you.
So I really appreciate that about you. But let's start out by telling a little bit about your background. I know you're from Zimbabwe originally. I love the accent. I wish I had. My accent still. I used to have a British, kind of a New Zealand accent because I lived in New Zealand as a child. So I had a Kiwi accent. I was a transplant. My dad worked there in the South Pacific for a time, but I came back and had this Kiwi accent for years and years. And people would always say, "Where are you from? Are you from England or something?" I think I've lost most of it because it's now a blend of Utah and Texas and Alaska and Italy. And, I've lost most of it. It's been, 40 plus years, but I love your accent. But tell us a little bit about what brought you to where you are today, because as a senior and an Alzheimer's expert, you've had your journey, right? Maybe talk about your father, if you would, and how you arrived at the place you are now where you're doing so much to bless those in need in this space.
Absolutely. Well, I always, starting off with where I come from, I'm originally from Zimbabwe. So I say to people now that I live here in the United States, and let me tell you, I love this country. I always say to people, I'm a white African-American Latina. And everybody, just like you, they laugh and they go, what does that mean? Well, it simply means my father was English. My mother was Spanish. I was born in Zimbabwe, and I am soon to be a citizen of the United States. So epigenetically, I'm a white African-American Latina.
I love that.
When it comes to how I've got to where I am, I must tell you that I'm very excited to share that I'm a university dropout. I dropped out of pre-med, out of medicine first year. And for a long time, that worried me to say that. But now more than ever, I'm excited because it shows that I've always had this love for medicine, for health, and the body's ability to heal itself, but I'm not attached to allopathic medicine. And so I can say a lot of things and do a lot of things that a doctor can't do because of the allopathic situation here. And the reason why I dropped out was simply this. I could barely pull apart frogs. And in your first year, you had to work on a human cadaver. And I hated even the sight of blood. So you would say, well, why would you be a doctor? Well, you don't need to be a doctor that sees blood and handles blood. So I left that and have had for many birthdays around the sun, I might add, this love for the body, for health and wellness. And I then, because I couldn't do that, I went to the other side of the scale. I became an evening wear designer and traveled the world, lived in South Africa, lived in Hong Kong, manufactured in Hong Kong, went to Australia. And it was while I was in Australia, I worked with Tony Robbins. And I met my husband at an event called Date with Destiny. Now, that's not a place where you go and hook up with people. This is really expanding and understanding one's potential. And he was in my line when I was coaching people on how to get up a 40-foot pamper pole. And that's how we met. We met 10 years before we married. And it was one day, you love this, it's when AOL became worldwide and that noise became synonymous with worldwide contact. And he contacted me through AOL and he said, you know what, you need to stop standing on your head in the Southern Hemisphere and right side up and come to the United States. And so he wooed me across the ocean with some beautiful poetry and great memories. And so we've been married now for 22 years. And
what a great story.
I love him. He's the love of my life. We do everything possible together. And one of those things was taking care of his parents. He had the most phenomenal parents. They are deeply centered in my heart. I spent more time with them than I did with my own parents, such that we they asked us to move in with them when Rick's dad was diagnosed with cancer. And she was off the old school. She was on a drug called warfarin and Coumadin, and couldn't eat anything green. And he had cancer and he needed to eat everything green. So we moved in and took over all of their supplementation, their food, so that they could live what we thought was the rest of their life with us healthily. And that lasted, I must tell you, 12 years. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to live with them. His mom, the perfect person when I look at how I would love to live my life and pass away. She was 90, she went to the gym in the morning, paid her taxes at lunchtime, and then that night she had a massive hemorrhagic stroke and lasted in a coma for 6 days, where everybody, more than 100 people, came to say goodbye. And I thought, well, that is phenomenal.
That's
His
the way I want to go.
dad lived till he was 96. And that story in itself is amazing, because we always thought he would go first, because he'd had so many ailments and issues with his health, from bladder cancer, skin cancer, all of those things. However, we were living with him when Rick's mom passed away. And I thought he would pass away very quickly, because he did have broken heart syndrome. The love of his life for 71 years left him in a blink of an eye.
Wow.
And so we lived with him, and I said to him very shortly after she passed away, I said, what is your plan? Is your plan to pass away? And that's okay. Or do you want to live? And he said, I still think I have some good years in me. And that was when he was 92. And for a year, we lived with him and loved him, and we're so grateful to have that time with him. And then overnight, he stopped talking English. He didn't know who I was. He thought the president was Lincoln. And when that happened overnight, I called the paramedics. They took him to hospital. And within a few short hours, they said to me, your father-in-law has Alzheimer's. And I go, how is that possible? Well, they didn't have an answer for that, and forced us to look into taking him to a memory care. They call them memory care now, but it was nothing short of a homeless shelter. It made One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest look like paradise. And we said no. So we put him in a rehab center for a couple of weeks, learned how to take care of him, brought him home. Everybody thought he would not live more than a couple of weeks. Well, I'm happy to share that he lived more than 2 years. Wow. And we brought him back from that, such that he was able to talk at a conference about stem cell activation, because that was one of the key things for him. And at his 96th birthday, having gone through breaking a hip during COVID, he looked amazing, sounded amazing. And on the way home, he said to my husband, it's time I go home. And Rick said, we're going home. And he said, no, it's time for me to go home to my wife. Within 45 days, he willed himself away. He passed away in my arms. And I always look back at what he left us. He left us this legacy that enabled us to work with other people, to reassure people that you can prevent it and you can reverse it. We're not talking about curing, because, I'm not a doctor. I can't make medical care claims, but we can certainly reverse the horrible effects of Alzheimer's if somebody has the mindset and determination to do that.
That is a fantastic story. And I've heard it before, but I heard more details today, Simone. I really appreciate that. We are up against our first break. We'll be back here in a minute, but I want to make one point, if I may, because you talk about not liking sight of blood and not being able to dissect a frog and so forth. And I know that was one of the reasons you came out of medicine, decided on a different path. But it was also, I think, that you were conflicted with big medicine, with big pharma, with prescription medicine and these other things. You started seeing, there's a better way than this. So when we come back, I want to talk more about that. Let's get into how you're helping reverse Alzheimer's, have the discussion on the big cabal, big medicine cabal, as you call it. But let us go to break. We'll be right back, folks. Don't go away. Thanks for listening.
All clear. Great segment.
Thanks, Andrew. I don't know if you have the chat up, Simone, but if you do, it shows the countdown he gives us as we get closer to the break. So it kind of helps us keep on track. But so I keep thinking that it was your father that had Alzheimer's, but it was actually Rick's dad. And I think it's because you just talk about him as though he's your dad.
Yes, I think that's important. I want to talk about a little bit about that. You can say, I always thought it was your dad, and I always say that people don't know this, but I was actually adopted.
Okay.
And I only found out when I was 35. That I was
Really?
adopted. So the man I'd called my father, who I love dearly, was not my father. And so I learned to understand what epigenetics meant, that you don't have to have the love of your biological father to feel loved.
Yeah.
And so my father died very shortly after I got married. And so for the rest of my time with Per, he was my father. The first time we met, he said to me, "Has Rick asked you to marry him?" And I said, yes. And he said, "Well, what did you say?" I said, "No." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Because he needs to get, as Baha'is, we need to get permission from our family, our parents." And I said, "He hasn't got your permission." He says, "Well, I'll give you my permission right away." And so and the other thing was why I called him my father, because he treated me like a daughter, because one of the things is Norwegians eat a cheese. It's made from goat's cheese. It's caramelized goat's cheese. Mm-hmm. And none of his daughter-in-laws would eat it or have it in the house. And I loved it. And so he said to me that really down deep inside, I must have been a Viking.
Wow. That's a great story. See, my brother and sister are both adopted. And my brother Adam has always been grateful for the adoption. He was raised
20 seconds.
Anyway, he's been grateful. My sister struggled with it, but we'll come back to that.
But I know people do get confused because they go, "Your dad."
You're listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Lang. Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
We're back with Simone Kvalheim. Now, do you say Kvalheim or Kvalheim?
Kvalheim.
Okay. That's how I would say it in German, Kvalheim, but I wasn't sure. So thanks for clarifying.
Because the Vikings say Kvalheim. But if you say Kvalheim here in the United States, they go, "Where is the Q?"
Right. And where's the W or whatever? Yeah. So over the break, we were talking a little bit about your husband's father, basically your father-in-law, Per, who you've now started a foundation in his name. Isn't that correct? It's called Vikingness.
Yes.
Home of the Vikings, the Per and Grey Kvalheim Foundation, which is a senior community. It's building a senior community, if you will, that reverses Alzheimer's. We were talking a little bit about just how your feelings for your father-in-law, how you were adopted, you found out at 35 years old, which is incredible. And then your father passed away not long after you're married to Rick. So Per became your dad, because I get confused sometimes. I think I keep thinking it was your father that you helped turn back the clock on the Alzheimer's with, but it was actually Rick's dad. But I think it's because of how you speak about him. You talk about him with such tenderness and so forth that the lines get blurry for me.
I think they get blurry for a lot of people because they go, "You're husband and wife, not brother and sister. So how come you've got the same dad?" But, I'm eternally grateful for the love that I have for him and the love that he shared with me. such that I became his primary caregiver in the last 2 weeks of his life. And he died in my arms. And I always think, having someone pass away in your arms is maybe the most amazing thing that can happen to you, because you actually experience that person going to God.
Yeah, you feel them leaving.
I don't know how to put it other than it's the closest other than taking care of his body for preparation for burial. That's, I believe, the closest I've got to God. And for that, I love him dearly.
We refer to it as the veil. There's
Yes.
this veil over our minds. We can't remember or can't see that side of the universe, but the veil, as we say, becomes very thin in those moments. I've always liked that definition. So let's talk a little bit about how it is that you were able to take him from not recognizing his grandchildren and not being able to, thinking that Lincoln was the president and so forth and so on, to actually being able to speak publicly and go and vote for his president of choice and know who he was voting for. And, these stories you've shared with me. And how did you do it? How do you do this? How is it actually happening? Because this is a really big announcement. This is, I think, an enormous blessing, an enormous statement that many out there, millions of listeners, could potentially benefit from if they so desire.
It starts off by being an advocate, not being a loved one. Because by being an advocate, you have to be strict. I became the food Nazi in the house. Anything that looked, smelt, or tasted like sugar had to be removed from the home, such that you're going to laugh at this little bit of a story. When they diagnosed him with Alzheimer's, they said it must have been something that he ate. And I thought, you know what? There's that show on TV called House. And House always sends his interns to break into the patient's home because he says patients lie about what they do. So I actually went home when they said that he had Alzheimer's. I thought, oh my God, I broke into our house. I took the screen off the bedroom window and broke into the house and pretended to be a CSI, a forensic scientist, to find out.
Right.
From that, I decided that, I needed to be the food Nazi. I needed to do all the research about medication, see what he was on, and that's how it started. And I was shocked to find that he'd been on a medication for more than 25 years, which only has an efficacy of 40 months. That's the maximum somebody should be on, less than, 4 years. And the side effects, they clearly state, lead to Alzheimer's and dementia. So when I started to look at all of that, I went with him to his doctor and I explained to his doctor, this is what I'm going to do. There's an amazing book that I found, and I've had the privilege to interview Dr. Dale Bredesen. It's The End of Alzheimer's. I met with him and I met with my father-in-law's doctor, Pear's doctor, and I said, this is what I'm going to do. I have power of attorney. He said, anything I can do to support you. Now, he was a young doctor and he was going through a lot of what I went through when I also decided to drop out of university medicine. And that was every day a doctor violates the Hippocratic Oath by saying they will do no harm. As soon as you put somebody on medication, it has side effects, you're violating that. Such that in the United States now, doctors do not have to swear to uphold the Hippocratic Oath.
Really? I didn't know
Big
that.
pharma. Yeah. So that's when I say I'm not a doctor. I don't have to worry about HIPAA. I can tell you about PEAR. I can tell everybody about PEAR. I'm not violating any confidentiality there. And to the rest of the family, they were horrified. They'd say to me, well, did you get permission from the doctor? I said, getting permission from the doctor to take someone off their medication is like going to a drug dealer that sells somebody cocaine and saying to them, I want to get off my habit. They're going to go, no, let me give you some more. And
Exactly.
that's what they were doing with PEAR. Every time something happened, they would give him something else. So we got him off that. And within a very short time, let me tell you, with 2 months, just looking at nutrition and medication, we were starting to see some significant results. And then I had the absolute amazing opportunity to meet with a scientist called David Schmidt, who has created a technology that activates and regenerates your stem cells. And I had done research and I couldn't find any way to improve the stem cells within his brain, because you can't go and have an injection in the forehead, right? You can have it in your shin, you can have it in your knee, you can have it in your shoulder, but not in the brain. And he created a piece of technology that you'll see here that activates using light. And on the premise, as Einstein says, that we are packets of light and vibrating at a frequency, this stimulates the body to heal itself. So with that, within 4 months, he was almost back to normal. Within 6 months, I did a presentation to a whole group of doctors in California talking about stem cell activation, and he was one of the speakers at 95 years old. And people say, you know, at that age, you have no stem cells to regenerate or to re-age or to make younger. Well, I challenge you. I challenge everybody, because it does work. And so with all of that, and maybe the most important piece to that is that Rick and I believed. It's that belief. It comes from the heart. It comes from God. We believed that we could make a difference and that he would heal. Too many people know that their parents or their grandparents have been diagnosed, or their husband, because we know people now as young as 50 are struggling with Alzheimer's. The members of their family just accept the diagnosis. And so they buy into that. And that kind of exacerbates the problem, because they'll say, you know what, he's got cancer at his age, he's going to die, let him eat whatever he wants to. When they said that to me about pear, I'd say no, because everything he's been eating over the last maybe 25 years has led to him having Alzheimer's. Because we know the match is lit for Alzheimer's 25 years before you exhibit the symptoms. It's chronic disease. And because it's chronic disease, we believe with enough people buying into this opportunity to heal people and the understanding that Alzheimer's should become a blip on the radar, just like polio.
Rather than a chronic disease,
Exactly.
an epidemic. You know, you made a comment at the conference this last week, and I don't know if you realized I was listening. We were sitting next to each other, but I heard you say something about senior moments and how people say, "Oh, I'm having a senior moment," and you know, there is power in words. Our brains, our intellect, our mindset has real power. I know there's the movie The Secret and others, Think and Grow Rich, that's international bestseller, and there is a lot of documentation and research and data that have gone into this. But I used to think, as I was growing up, we hear this saying that attitude determines our altitude, right? And I thought, well, that makes sense. If I have good attitude, I'll work hard and probably do more. But I've since come to learn in the last 50 plus years that it goes way beyond that. It's not just having a good attitude and working hard. It literally has almost a magnetic or a organic effect on our lives, on our careers, on our health, etc. They have technology now where they put the different nodes on your brain, and they're able to measure the brain waves, right? They measure the frequencies of a positive thought versus a negative thought, and they've proven that a positive thought vibrates something like 10,000 times faster than a negative thought, and it actually attracts toward its similar frequencies. Now, you know a lot more about this than I do, but I've come to believe that there is something to that it's not just hyperbole. It's not just it's not just a seminar that somebody's giving and wants you to buy into. I mean, there is real strength in that, in the language we use, in the thoughts we think, and how we approach these challenges. Do we buy into them and let them consume us? Or do we take another path? The whole scarcity versus abundance conversation, the whole The whole, I mean, I used to say my head's killing me. Yeah, I don't say that anymore
No,
because I don't want it to. Right? So,
well,
anyway, any thoughts on that? I know you're a big believer
absolutely.
in
You
this.
know, thoughts are things. And when we say things, first of all, when someone says, I'm having a senior moment, I say to them, take notice, because something is happening. We don't say we have a senior moment just for no reason. If you walk out into the garage and you're standing in front of your fridge in the garage and you're not sure why you're there, or you can't find your keys, there's something happening and you need to take notice. And it doesn't mean you're going down the path of Alzheimer's. It means that something is happening neurologically that you can change. When it comes to words and thoughts, as soon as our dad was now conversing very quickly back to English, I set him up for him to write his gratitude journal. And every day he would write 5 things that he was grateful for. In the beginning, it was the same 5 things, but after a while it expanded as he expanded his gratitude. And one of the last things that he said to me is that he loved me, you know, and that he was grateful to Rick and I, and that stays in my heart. And then the other thing that's really important with people that have Alzheimer's and dementia is creating oxytocin, is the hugging. Every day we would hug him and he'd hug us back. Every night, a powerful piece. Rick would go into his bedroom, stroke his head. I mean, this man is 6'5", right? A big guy, but he always stroked his head because he was completely bald. He had one of those beautiful heads, and he would rub his head and say, I love you, Dad.
Wow, that's
I
powerful.
mean, that makes me want to cry, just telling you. And that put him to sleep. And we know that sleep, this is another thing. Somebody said at the conference that we were at that made my hair stand up on end. And they said, you know, sleep is overrated. You can do that when you die. My thing is, that's the worst advice people can give you, because you can die from not having sleep.
I agree.
Sleep is important to regenerate the body. And the other thing, you know, when I went and did pre-med, we were told we had a finite number of brain cells. We know now that that's not true. Sleep helps us regenerate our brain.
Right. Well, I couldn't agree more. I'd like to come back. We're coming up on our next break here, but I'd like to come back and talk a little bit more about some of the forces out there that are incorrect, that are even not just detrimental, but I think are outright abusive, strategic, you know, things like Monsanto, things like the big pharma. Let's talk a little bit about that when we come back from the break, because I know how you feel. You're very passionate about that, but I think there's some insights you can share with the audience that would be good to do exactly that. Good to get out there. We've got about 1 more minute here, but as you talk about oxytocin and, you know, endorphins are the same. These are powerful chemicals and powerful stimuli within our bodies, and I think we forget how powerful they can be. You know, they talk about how important it is. I think it was back in World War II or World War I where they realized babies were dying, but there was one ward where the babies were thriving, and they said, what's the difference between these? It was after they'd figured out, you know, bacteria at least, but they realized that the nurses in that ward were holding the babies and rocking them where the others weren't. I think there's a lot we can talk about. That's probably a whole episode in and of itself. But it's powerful stuff, right? Any last thoughts just in the last 30 seconds before we go to break?
Well, you know, I'd like to talk, when you talk about big pharma, I'd like to talk about the outsourcing of our health, the outsourcing of our lives. You know, technology is an amazing thing, but it's led us to be not taking responsibility. That's another thing. You know, taking responsibility for one's life, period, is a big thing.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth in that, Simone. That applies in so many areas of our life, right? It's not just our health, but it's our business, our relationships. I've always believed, and I've heard it said, that we are either progressing or digressing. There's no such thing as status quo. right? We're never just static. We are either improving or we're getting worse. And so that's it's a good reminder as we're looking at our relationships and things like that. Am I building my relationship, or is it getting worse? It's usually not. It might feel like it's just status quo, it's just static, but it's because the digression or progression isn't always. It isn't always aggressive. It isn't always noticeable, but it is happening, right? So anyway, we'll come back. It's time to go to break again, folks. Thanks for listening. We're listening to Simone Kvalheim, who is the owner of Accelerated Health. We'll talk a little bit more about your businesses when we come back, because you're doing lots of different things. You're involved with a lot. And I didn't really do a bio at the beginning. I'll explain why as soon as we come back.
All clear. Great segment.
So I can say this when we get back on air, but I don't do a big bio like a lot of the hosts do. I know Frank usually does and others do, but I think it's already written on the on the episode description, and I feel like it takes up a lot of time. And instead I try to weave it into the conversation. But I do want to address your 3 projects. So
Lovely. Thank you.
we will touch on them when we get back. But so tell me about Rick's book. You said you originally started talking to Bill about his book. I didn't even know he had a book. I knew that you were an author, but
no, he is. He started when his dad was alive. His dad was diagnosed in December of 2018, and in June 2019 he started this idea of writing a book about his dad's recovery. And he never got to the end of the book, because there was always new stuff and new stuff and new stuff. And then his dad passed away. And grief is a real thing, no matter how strong and how prepared we think we are, whether we're close to our loved one or not. It hit us badly. And it hit us badly even more because the family came after me. I don't know if I ever told you, the family sued me for elder abuse and elder financial abuse. So that they could open up the trust. And that's why I get so aggressive when people say, oh, a family living trust will protect you. It's not worth the paper it's written on. And because of, so all of that, and then Rick stopped writing his book. And it's interesting, he's been doing a little bit of stuff. He's turned to me, he's had lots of conversations with Sharon. Sharon Lechter loves Rick to pieces. Really? You know, we were at an event where she promoted his book.
Coming back now.
Let's talk more about it later.
You're listening to Finding Certainty with Patrick Lang. Have a question for Patrick or his guests? Join us on the show at 866-472-5790. That's 866-472-5790. Now, back to the show with Patrick.
Welcome back to Finding Certainty, everybody. We're visiting with Simone Kvalheim, who is an author. She's a business owner. She's a public speaker. She actually owns several different projects, including a senior magazine named Boomerang, a senior transition company named Love Mom First, which I love that name, and her health-focused business, Accelerated Health, which is, again, focused on not just preventing, but reversing Alzheimer's, as we've been discussing. So, you know, as I've gotten to know you, Simone, I keep learning little things about you. I mean, the fact you've been on the stage with the likes of Sharon Lechter and Tony Robbins, and I mean, the list goes on. And I think I'm impressed, and then I learn more, and I'm even more impressed. So I love your statement. If I can just say, I love your statement about how you say you're committed to adding years to life and life to years. Do you mind commenting on that just for a moment? Then I want to get into some of the forces that are fighting against real lasting health.
Well, it's because of the forces that are out there. You know, when you turn 55, they tell you to go and get your blood work done because now you need to be on medication. And that starts this whole cascade. You know, I don't have medical insurance for the simple reason I don't believe that I need to, at this point, go in, have my blood work done and put on medication, because a lot of people do that. And because their medication is so inexpensive, they don't think twice about what it's doing to them. And then they get caught up in that trap. And before you know it, I can speak for myself, you're 65 and you're on 12 medications and one of them is Ambien. You try and get life insurance when you're on Ambien, they don't want to know about you. The insurance company already says this person is high risk. And so it's what medications do to you. That was one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about writing my book. My book is the next 8,000 days. I turned 65 a month ago, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was prepared for it. I've always felt young. I think I look young. But when you actually see that marker, 65, and it struck me that, you know, whenever you do a quiz or you do a survey, they ask you your age and they have these brackets, and then they come to 65. And then there's nothing after 65. And I thought to myself, what the hell? Well, what the heck? What happens when you're 65? Well, everything happens when you're 65. And you've added life to your years. Because going through medication, they just want you to live as long as you can. They don't care how you are. You can be a dribbling mess in a memory care clinic at 90 and have been there for 10 years. Mine was to be like my mother-in-law. As I said, she paid her, she went to the gym, paid her taxes, and then she passed away in full cognition, the picture of health.
That's the way to go.
That's how I believe people should live. Whether you die at 65, 75, or 96, be aware of where you are, and God takes you because it's God's time.
Right.
Not because it's big pharma's, the consequences of being on big pharma's medication. Exactly. And so my book, The 8,000 Years, is really also because I met a millennial who said, oh my God, you're a baby boomer. I said, I am. And that person said, oh, you're the generation that's going to wipe out Social Security. We're going to be left here with no pension, no nothing, just a mess. And I thought, you know, us baby boomers, we've spiked every single market we've gone into as we've aged. And the next 8,000 years is where we're going to change the face of senior living. Senior living currently is called senior care. And they take care of seniors and they entertain them and take care of their personal needs. People like, and play bingo. People like me at 65, when we're looking to our senior years, we want to be in a community of like-minded people, contributing, living, playing cash flow, and generating generational wealth. And so at 65, we have this amazing capacity to do that, to generate multi-generational wealth. Because at 65, we have so much experience and we know what to do. And we're not expecting people to do it for us. And so that's what that book is about. Love Moms First is a project of mine to help seniors get into the senior care, to get the care that they need. Because, you know, one of the problems with senior living is it's expensive. And when people find out that mom has to go into senior care, they pull their hair out and go, how are we going to do this? We have to sell mom's house. But mom's lived there for 25 years. She's been an aggressive collector. And there's 25 years of deferred maintenance. Well, we come along and take the stress off the plate, work with the daughter, Judy, we call her, and take care of the house and the stuff and get them the equity they need.
Well, I was really fascinated by that part of your business. I know the Accelerated Health focuses on improving health and reversing these symptoms, these diseases, Alzheimer's specifically, but you help in other areas as well. The stem cell research can help in several different areas, not just Alzheimer's, but it helps with chronic pain. It helps with chronic fatigue. I mean, the list goes on. And we don't have time to get into that in today's show, but I think we should probably do a whole nother show at another time and really dig into that technology, because I believe, and I heard a statement this weekend at this conference. He commented on I forget who it was he was referring to, but he was in his 90s. And he says, my best years have been since from between 65 and 95. I mean, I've accomplished more. I've built my wealth. I've written books. I've spoken. I've traveled. He had married a younger woman.
Yes, no Lee.
Was it Noel Lee that he was
Yes.
talking about? And he's the CEO and founder of Monster Cable. They refer to him as the head monster. I loved that. They developed the Beats headphones and sold it for $3 billion to Apple. And he attributed doing it all since he was in his 60s. And he's in a wheelchair too for 30 years.
Yeah.
I mean, man, if he could do it, anybody could do it, right? And so, well, probably not, but you know what I mean. But with the advance of technologies, they believe that people can live into their early hundreds, 110, 120. I mean, with medical advances and so forth. However, there are those forces that are very detrimental. And as we're coming up on the end of the show, just comment on Monsanto and the big pharma and your feelings on that. You also even mentioned the Alzheimer's Foundation as not necessarily a positive force. And I think that's a really important point to make. They may not like to hear this, but I think it's a very insightful comment, if you don't mind making it.
Absolutely. Because our dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, people say, oh, you obviously do Alzheimer's walks and you give to the Alzheimer's Foundation. And I say no, because the Alzheimer's Foundation, the incentive for them to donate money to a cure is not there. Because as long as Alzheimer's is out there, they have a way to generate money for the foundation. And as you know, like a lot of foundations, the money goes to the infrastructure of the foundation. So there's no incentive to find a cure.
That's interesting.
That's my big thing.
That's a really interesting
and so
point.
I would say, there's a lot of other places to put your money, a lot of other places. When it comes to Big Pharma and Monsanto, I'm concerned about how easily and readily people take medication without knowing the side effects. I have something that's purely natural, and people will say, well, can you show me the clinical trials and the patents? And I can, but I say to them, now you're on this particular medication. Before you took it, did you ask your doctor for the clinical trials? Did you ask what's in it? And of course, that's become a bit of a soapbox in the last 2 years, because people are doing things to their body without knowing what it does and without mentioning it directly. I would say to people, why is it that people are suddenly dropping dead? Why are athletes who at the peak of their performance in life are dropping dead? It's because of what they're taking without thinking about the consequences. Classic to that is our dad went to his gastroenterologist, and the gastroenterologist said to him at 96, I'm surprised to see you alive. And he said, why? He said, well, are you still on your medication? He says, no, that medication causes Alzheimer's. And the gastroenterologist said, no, it doesn't. He says, well, I'm not taking it because it does.
Wow.
And so there are things that people take over the counter thinking that they're safe. It's just like food. People are eating certain foods thinking that they're safe. And the worst thing is when you go in a supermarket, the thing that you see the most of, if you stop and look, is sugar. And sugar is more addictive than cocaine. They've done tests with rats, and rats will give up their cocaine for sugar. And so we've been told that fats are bad for us. The brain needs fat, but it doesn't need sugar.
That's incredible. I wish we could keep going. Very interesting topics. What you're doing, Simone and Rick, shout out to you. What you guys are doing in these areas to help is just really impressive. It's my honor to know you. How can people get a hold of you, just in closing?
Well, I'm happy for people to text me. I have a text number. It is 760-953-9484. Text me with any questions. I'd be delighted to help. I do a free consultation to find out where people are at. and how I can help them, or look me up on LinkedIn. And I believe that's in your page that you're doing for Voice America today. So again, the number is 760-953-9484. And it takes courage to text me, because it's the admission or the understanding that something is not happening as it should be. But take courage and know that I'll help you.
As you said, half the battle is showing up, right?
Correct.
Well, thanks for listening to Finding Certainty today, everybody. Unfortunately, we are out of time. The hour always passes so quickly. It's hard to believe, but come back next week. We're going to be meeting with Donna Campbell of the Mentors Studio, a phenomenal business leader, public speaker, coach that can teach you how to get your message out. Just like your message, Simone, so important. Thanks for being here today. Really appreciate you and your friendship, and give my best to Rick. And we'll be back next week, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great week out there, and go find certainty for yourself. It's out there waiting. Take care.
All clear. Great job today, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank
Andrew.
you.
Hey, Patrick, we went a little long there at the end, so we do need to be out at 57.
Okay.
Yep.
We appreciate that.
Have a great day.
Yeah, we pushed it a little bit, but it was good. It's hard to stop when you're.
I know.
There's so much to say. If there's anything you feel like we didn't touch on, or anything you want to add to, the video is still running, and so the YouTube video, they get the behind the scenes, the break comments, and
I think,
wrap up if there's anything else that you'd really like to address.
yes, I think it's how we talked about we've abdicated our responsibility for driving. We'd go get an Uber now, whereas before people wouldn't drink. Now they can drink and drive, go by Uber. We've abdicated our food to Uber Eats, right? Fast food. We've abdicated our health to Big Pharma and the system. It's now time for us to take it back and be responsible. When we see what's happening to our body, and that the body can heal itself, it doesn't need medication. It needs oxytocin, it needs sleep, it needs water, it needs good food, it needs family, it needs gratitude, all of those things that cost nothing in the scheme of things. We can do some amazing things and live a long, long life.
So true. And not just a long life, but a good life.
A good life.
My family I think we have pretty good genes. My grandparents all lived into their 90s, other than my one grandfather who ended up getting prostate cancer and died in his 70s. But my grandmother lived to 96, my other grandfather into his 90s, my grandmother 88. And she just went because he went, he passed eventually, and she was gone 30 days later. And
broken heart syndrome.
Yeah. So I'm grateful for that. I have a good head of hair. Both my grandfathers had full heads of hair. And it's funny, I was on a call the other day, and everyone on the call was bald except for me. And they were giving me a hard time, saying I was the one who wasn't as handsome as they were.
Well, you know what Rick would say? He said, any man can grow hair. Anybody can grow hair, but it takes a real man to wear it out.
Yeah, that's funny. So congratulations on your new book coming out.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really very excited. I don't know if you were there when I had the opportunity to speak to Les.
To Les Brown, yes.
Yeah. I do have him on my speed dial. And he's one of my people. I just got a text back that he's going to be in the book because he's a baby boomer. And what he's been able to do, go from nothing to being one of the world's leading speakers. So I've got quite a few great people for the first book, and I'm already thinking I've got to do a series because there's so many impactful people that we're going to really change the narrative of what, how millennials will think of us, and creating generational wealth.
Well, exactly. Now, why did you pick the number 8,000 days?
Good question. The insurance companies, health insurance, Hartford, it's now become this science that's been studied at Harvard, that life is split up into 8,000 days, from 0 to 21, and then it's every 8,000 days. So now from 66 onwards, we are expecting to have a life expectancy of at least 20 years. That it's the next 8,000 days. And we've got, we've been able to extend life since the 50s by 30 years, because people were, going into retirement at 60 and dying. Now we're going into this new stage of life, a new career, a new adventure, and being able to live to 90. And the Bible says we have the ability to live at least to 120 years. So I mean, we know that there are people in the Bible that lived for over 900 years, but then the rest of humanity did things that God didn't approve of. So he cut back our age to 120.
Yeah, we can cause less trouble in less time, right?
Yes, I think that's it.
I know you hear of Noah and these others, Melchizedek and others that lived hundreds of years, and you think, man, how did they do that? And I think you're right. I think God's hand was in it. It wasn't just their diet. I'm sure, although I'm sure they ate way better than we do. No Monsanto grain and no GMO and
no GMOs. The thing about what we were saying about genetics actually only plays about 5% into who we are. But I think there's generations like our parents and our grandparents that have lived to 90, 96 years because they went through the war, they went through the depression. Mm-hmm. They didn't have modified foods, genetically modified foods. So we might have the good genes, but it's what's going into the body that's blocking the receptors, that's not enabling those genes to actually work and enable us to live a long life. And that's why younger people are dying younger.
I agree. I really enjoyed the conversation from Dr. Gappin.
Yes.
Talked about cutting out, bottled water with plastic bottles and using a carbon block filter. And he talked about the value of sleep. He was one of those who really promoted it, and so forth as well. I actually signed up for his service because I was impressed with what he had to say. So anyway, we could keep talking, but we'll probably should stop the video before it goes too long. But really appreciate you being on the call, Simone. Always a pleasure. Really appreciate your friendship and your professionalism and your vision for what can and must be done. It's not just this would be nice. Let's see if we can help. You guys are taking the bull by the horns and doing something about it. And we're doing some things together with our benefit service, our low-cost benefits that are great for seniors and great for others. When you can have some medical coverage and dental and vision and 85% off prescriptions, and it's $30 a month for the whole family. I mean, that's something that everyone can afford, even seniors on fixed income and so forth and so on. So excited to be working with you on that as well. And like I said, we could keep talking, but we better wrap it up. Any last words? Any last thoughts?
Patrick, just thank you for your friendship and for inviting me to be on your show. I'm honored to be here with you, and thank you. And all my love to your parents, because they've shared some insight about you that we need to talk about on your show next time.
Nickname.
And to your lovely wife, and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you as well. And if you want to know what she's referring to, my parents call me TIO because kind of like CEO, but they call it TIO because they wanted to have 12 children. They only had me biologically. I do have 2 adopted siblings, but they call me TIO because I'm 12 in 1. I think it's referring to how much trouble I caused growing up, but no, I'm just kidding. But and Simone has that insight. Not very many people have heard that nomenclature, but because she's done some work for my folks as well. So, all right, my friend. Well, thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day. And thanks for being on the show. And I'm sure we'll talk lots more.
Lovely. Merry Christmas.
You as well.